welcome back to What the Fertility. Today we are chatting with Dr. Emily Guarnotta on the emotional and psychological toll of infertility. Dr. Guarnotta is a psychologist specializing in maternal mental health. She co-founded Phoenix Health, and she works with individuals navigating infertility, postpartum, and more. Welcome so much to the show. We are so excited to have you. I cannot wait to dive in. I don't think we've had a psychologist on.
Ooh, this is
Yeah, this is
exciting.
exciting. I know that everybody, has their opinions, but I love to hear kind of from an expert. I guess first things first, how did you get into this space? This is like a really niche space.
My journey to working with reproductive mental health started. I've been working as a psychologist for about 10-ish years, and I had my first child 8 years ago. And I originally got into this space because I suffered from postpartum depression, and the whole experience was just really eye opening. I kind of believed that as a psychologist, I was somehow exempt from struggling with my mental health during the postpartum period. And after I got back into therapy, I got better, I recovered. I started doing more trainings in perinatal mental health, and perinatal just refers to the full spectrum of trying to conceive to postpartum or 1 year out. And I started learning all about that period and all the different experiences that people go through, including infertility. And I started working with a lot of clients who were navigating that journey and had a lot of friends and family that were going through it. And even though I personally didn't go through infertility, it's been really eye opening to learn about that journey through friends and family and the clients that I work with, and learning on how to support them as someone who hasn't been through it but really wants to be a support during such a vulnerable time. So that's kind of how I made my way to this work. And I'm so grateful for all the individuals and families that allow me into their lives during something that's so difficult.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I mean, I think the personal experience of postpartum depression in itself is like experiencing, right, the mental health issue. I personally experienced postpartum anxiety after having several losses, and it is something, like you said, like you just don't think is gonna happen to you, and is so eye-opening. And I think one of the questions that a lot of listeners ask about are, where are these resources for mental health specific to infertility, specific to postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, because they're still so underserved. Do you see that, being that specialist that is tapped into the resources, do you still feel like it's underserved?
Totally. I think, there are folks out there that are qualified to help, but it can be hard to find them, especially, if you don't know where to start. And sometimes even our doctors or nurses, who are the first people that are kind of seeing that we might be struggling with our mental health, they might not know how to connect you with the right people. So I think it's so important to have these conversations and get the word out that there are people out there that can help you, and like, here's how you can find them.
Yeah, and I think that brings us to Phoenix Health, right? So tell us a little bit about that and how that plays into your current career and as a resource for our listeners as well.
So Phoenix Health is my practice that I co-founded a couple of years ago. It kind of started out as my own solo practice about 7 years ago, and then I've grown it over the last couple of years. We offer telehealth across the country, and we specialize in working with the perinatal period. So myself and all the providers on our team have done tons of extra training in working with infertility and loss, pregnancy and postpartum. So we're really equipped to help you throughout that entire reproductive journey. And we also take insurance in 10 states right now. So the affordability and accessibility is something that's super important to us as well.
That's amazing. I am just so passionate about this topic. I've talked about it a few times on the podcast before, but suffered from recurrent pregnancy loss, and my doctors would say, go to a therapist, seek help. And once you have that one or two bad experiences, you kind of stop, right? And so I was sent to a like Joe Smo therapist that didn't really have the infertility or the maternal health that you're discussing today. And what the first thing she said back to me was, well, have you had a good cry about it? I'm like, lady, you have any idea how many times I've cried about it? So I just think, like, for me, even just to have understood that there are these resources out there that specialize in that, because you're going to get such a different experience if you're going to maybe somebody that didn't have the education and training on that. So I love that that's like a telemedicine approach as well, so other people can access it even if they're not close by. um, I know we really wanted to touch on trauma, infertility, trauma, loss, trauma. So, I guess as a basic question, an intro question, do you believe that infertility is considered a form of trauma?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. By definition, trauma is an experience that you personally go through or you witness someone else go through that's really scary. That by definition could be life threatening, but doesn't necessarily have to be. But this really scary, really challenging, difficult experience. And I always say trauma is in the eye of the beholder. So what's trauma to one person may or may not be trauma to another person. But if you've experienced your infertility journey as really difficult, really traumatic, and at times for some folks actually is life threatening, I mean, multiple surgeries and losses, then it is definitely by definition trauma.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's just so validating to hear from someone like you, right? Because as women, a lot of the time, our emotions are downplayed or passed off. And so I think it's just so validating to hear that it is traumatic. It is a very traumatic experience. And why do you think that it's so psychologically, like, that impact is so strong in there? I mean, other than those of us who've been through it, we know the ins and outs, the shots, the appointments, con- continuous thought process. But why have you found that it is such an intense journey for, these types of patients?
I think it affects every part of your life. Physical, you mentioned, the shots, the appointments, the tests. It affects emotionally, the roller coaster, the loss of control, the
Yes.
shame, the guilt that you can feel, the feeling like your body's failing, the impact that it has on your relationships, even spiritual impacts. I mean, it literally touches every area of your life. And I've also, had it described as this heartbreak. You picture yourself, we all have these reproductive stories that we start telling ourselves really young. Some of us picture ourselves as moms really young, and we kind of picture like how many kids we'll have and what it'll look like and what it'll be like to get to that journey. And then we get to the point where maybe we're ready to grow our family, and then we find out that that story is not going to unfold in the way that we've always pictured it. And it's just such a heartbreak in that alone, on top of all the other experiences. And for some people going through the journey, there really are serious medical, life threatening aspects of it that, by definition make it trauma. So I think it's so layered, it affects every part of your life. And often it's something that the other people outside of maybe your inner circle aren't necessarily clued into or aware of. So it's also very isolating on top of
It,
it.
yeah, I mean, you said that so perfectly. I feel like it is so isolating because it's such this like invisible loss, right? Like it's this invisible loss of what you mentioned, your idea of what your life looked like, or even not invisible to the woman carrying the baby, but to everybody else. They never saw the baby, they never saw the pregnancy. So I mean, you make some really good points. Are there, when you work with your patients, and I know you work with them perinatally, right? Like across the whole spectrum. But I would say maybe for your infertility patients, do you notice any trauma like symptoms? Like, is there anything that you notice in them symptom wise that kind of come out that, I don't know, maybe we could touch on some of those symptoms and how you do address those?
100%. Yeah. One of the big ones is the hypervigilance and the constant anticipation of things going wrong. and the anxiety that that creates. I see you shaking your head
Well,
really
I
hard.
just like that was such a weird moment that you said the word hypervigilance because I just am coming out of my postpartum anxiety and not to tangent, but you're the first person that's ever used that word other than Chat GPT when I was trying to get my own help. And I was like, why do I feel like I'm not as connected to my second child as much as I am my first? And just a quick little snippet, I had several losses before my first and I had two before my second. ChatGPT said because she was born into a hyper vigilant environment and you were so I mean it feels like you're just turned on at like 200, at like speed 200 for everything. So sorry to derail, but I just like that was a weird moment that you used that word.
Yeah, sometimes a word just connects to your experience and it's super
Yeah.
validating. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was just having a conversation with someone just the other day about how they're finally at their journey at a point where things are going well. But their entire journey before this, it's been disappointment after disappointment after disappointment. So they've learned to brace themselves just for disappointment and to anticipate that at every single appointment and step of the process. And now that things are going well, instead of that anxiety settling down, it's just amplifying more and more because it's like at some point, something has to go wrong again. And that like literally gets into your, bones, your nervous system. And it's really hard to kind of quiet that. And when I work with my clients that are going through this, one of the things I like to do is to, educate them on this is your brain trying to protect you in some way, even though it's, not going about it the best way, but it wants you to anticipate things going wrong because it wants to be, 10 steps ahead. Even though that really doesn't feel good. But we can kind of understand and maybe even appreciate our brains for what it's trying to do. And then I really like to help them regulate their nervous systems and figure out what works personally for them. So for some people, that's a meditation practice. For some people, that's exercise, it's time in nature, it's journaling, but it's just finding these things that help calm down your nervous system because when you're in a constant state of fight or flight, it's just that feeling of hypervigilance and anticipation. So we need to signal to our nervous system, we're safe, we can calm down. Let's do the activities that help calm that.
I love that. Just like acknowledging where that feeling's coming from and maybe why you're having those thoughts. I think, again, I'm relating to a lot of the things that you're saying. A lot of women ask me, how did you handle pregnancy after loss? And my true response is I did not. I didn't handle it, right? Like I was so anxious the entire time. I wasn't able to enjoy that. Do you work, it sounds like you do. Do you work with women that have either gone through infertility or loss and then they're pregnant? Do you have any tips for listeners that may say like, how do I handle the pregnancy after loss?
Yeah, it's really hard, and I think there's then so much pressure to be enjoying the pregnancy because you're so supposed to be happy and grateful that you're pregnant, but when your anxiety is so high, it feels impossible to be able to settle down and enjoy the experience. And I was actually just talking to someone the other day about this, and I said to them, I said, it's okay if you don't enjoy this and you just want to get to the other side. And I think that felt like a lot of relief for them because they were feeling all this pressure and getting all these messages that you need to enjoy it. You need to, plan the baby shower and get excited and get the nursery ready, but they just were not feeling comfortable doing that. So
Yeah.
I like to throw the shoulds out the door and give you permission to approach your pregnancy in the way that feels right to you. And that can be very different than maybe what your friends or family would do or want from you. But when you take the pressure off, it at least takes off one heavy layer. So I like to remind them that it's okay, if your goal is just to get through this pregnancy and just survive it.
Yeah, I everything that you've said so far, I wish I would have known you prior because I personally had a really hard time finding help like this, like finding mental health to walk me through what I know I should be doing, right? I think a lot of this stuff is like we know that we don't have to do the baby shower, but that just the external pressure friends and family. It makes you feel like you're not, and especially women that have gone through infertility, it's like we should be even more excited, right? Because this is what we have worked so hard to get to. But no, I appreciate how validating you are and the resources that you're giving women. I think one more question I have prior to kind of jumping into another topic would just be like, would you recommend, and I think I know the answer, but would you recommend listeners getting help while they're walking through infertility and loss, prior to, becoming pregnant if that's something that happens for them, or at what stage of the grief journey do you recommend kind of seeking help?
I always say it's never too early or never too late, but I am a big proponent in being proactive. And I think everyone should have support, whatever that looks like, throughout an infertility and loss journey and grief. So I would highly recommend, even if you feel like you're managing for the most part, even just having that as a backup or just someone in your back pocket for the future, I think it's super helpful. And I wish that every reproductive doctor would have referrals for their patients and just hand it to them just in case, because I think it is such a critical part of the journey.
Couldn't agree more. And for somebody that did not seek help, right? Like I didn't go to a therapist until I had had both of my children and I was like ready to like start processing everything. I think that if I would have done it along the way, I would have been able to process the rest of like my experience a little better as well. So I love that. And I definitely agree with like, it's never too late. One of the biggest topics I think that women struggle with is the 2 week wait, right? We Everybody just wants to be pregnant. And if you're going through infertility and loss, you want to be pregnant like that month. And so doesn't work that way, right? We have to wait. We have to wait for the results. Why do you think for women the 2 week wait is so hard mentally?
I think it's just that anticipation and that period of limbo where you not don't know what's going to happen, and it gives your brain an opportunity to picture every possible scenario. And our brain, of course, loves to picture all the worst scenarios, and it's really easy to get swept away in that. And even when you're trying to bring yourself back or say, let's stay in the present moment, your brain just kind of has a way of wanting to go off and go to that place again as kind of a way to prepare you for the worst case scenario, though it's not super helpful or productive to constantly be going to that space. But a lot of women have trouble with that, where our thoughts, we can really just get swept away in our thoughts and a lot of catastrophic worst case scenario thinking, and the 2 week wait just kind of fuels that.
Do you have any resources for your clients when they're coming to you and saying, I'm going to start testing or I just ovulated? What kind of advice do you give to your clients?
I take a strong present mindfulness approach. So I really encourage all of my clients to be doing some sort of mindfulness practice, whether that's actually meditating, but it doesn't even have to look like that. It could be just noticing when your thoughts trail off to worst case scenarios and being present to that, bringing yourself back, taking a couple deep breaths. And then when your brain goes off again to the worst case scenario, which it could happen, 100 times in 5 minutes, you just keep bringing yourself back. And some people really benefit from having kind of like an anchor, like a statement or an affirmation that they can repeat to themselves that grounds them. Some people might hold on to an object, they might journal, but some kind of present-centered practice, whatever that looks like for you, I find to be very helpful during periods of, uncertainty like that.
Yeah, I've seen like those 2 week wait journals out there, or just something to keep your mind off of those thoughts. Big question, and this is totally an opinion question, but like, do you recommend women not testing during that 2 week wait period? Do you feel like that like amplifies the stress?
I do. I think it can kind of fuel, in some cases, fuel a compulsion, like a reassurance
Yes.
seeking. And though those, doing things like that to try to get an answer can, in some cases, make you feel better, if it's the answer you're seeking. Though sometimes you might just get more anxious. You might just start with what ifs after that, but typically it just fuels the anxiety more. So I do recommend working on ways to cope with the uncertainty versus constantly seeking out the
Right.
reassurance.
Because then you can just make it worse, right? Then you're getting a negative test. And to your point, then you're imagining, well, what if it turns positive tomorrow? And it's that like obsessive behavior. Well, I think that's great information. Do you have any other information specifically regarding the 2 week wait that you'd want to share with listeners?
I just want to validate that it is really hard to be in a period of uncertainty like that. And especially when you might not be sharing it with many people in your life. It might just be you and your partner that know what you're going through. And I just want to honor that it is extremely difficult and encourage people to find what really works for them and to try different things to
Yeah, because
help manage that
yeah,
anticipation.
because I mean, really, it could be half your year, right? 2 weeks out of the month. I mean, it can be all consuming. And then if it is not the outcome that you want, you're again waiting almost another 2 weeks to start the 2 week wait again. So yeah, I definitely resonate with just how difficult that is. On top of that, how do you kind of work with your clients for all these announcements, right? Whether it's if infertility, loss, anxiety, depression, all of the social media announcements. So whether that's a mom posting about her 4 month old and her having a great time, and you're like for your experience going through postpartum depression and not being able to like be like, why is that not me? Like, why are we not going through that? Or, oh my gosh, they've just announced their second pregnancy and I still can't get pregnant with my first. Do you work with a lot of clients on that, like those triggers that happen, whether that's through announcements, birthday parties, baby showers?
Absolutely. I think it's in some ways, so much harder to be going through this now in today's world with social media than it was, 15, 20 years ago. I, I'm a big proponent of filtering your social media. If there are accounts that are upsetting you, totally okay, to mute them or block them, to do digital detoxes, take yourself off, create some distance with those triggers. And I really encourage people to make space for whatever feelings come up, because I often find when someone's feeling, it could be anger, it could be feeling like life is unfair, it could be jealousy, whatever you want to call it. It's not so much the feeling that's the problem, it's the fact that they're judging themselves after they feel that. Like, I'm terrible, friend or person for feeling
Yeah.
this way about hearing that my friend, is expecting. But I like people to know it's totally understandable that you would feel this way, and it's okay to feel that. Like, it doesn't make you a bad person, a bad friend. If you kind of make space for the feeling, it does have a way of quieting down. It kind of comes and goes, versus when you start judging yourself and beating and shaming
Yeah.
and all the things, it just festers and grows to something, bigger that's a lot more difficult. So I work again like mindfulness based approaches with helping people notice the feeling and then kind of let it go through your body and come out the other side.
I love that. I never thought about like it's like doubling down on the guilt, right? Okay, now it's you're already frustrated that you're seeing this and then you're judging yourself for being frustrated. I like that a lot. That's really good. Um what would you say, or and maybe you do or don't know, but what would you say would be some signs in people that, hey, maybe it's time I seek out some mental health?
I would say if you find that you're feeling more sad, more worried or afraid than you typically would, and it's, persisting beyond a couple of days to weeks, maybe it's gone on months or even years. If you feel like your symptoms are affecting your sleep, they're affecting your appetite, maybe you can't focus as well, maybe it's affecting your relationships, like you're wanting to isolate more than usual. Those are all signs that there may possibly be a mood disorder or an anxiety disorder going on. And again, to seek out help, it's never too early or too late. So even if you don't have, by definition, a diagnosis of an anxiety disorder or a mood disorder, you can still see a therapist, you can still talk to them, you can still talk about your options and figure out if it's the right time for you. But those are some of the more common signs that things might be a bit off.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, it might be too personal, but I mean, would you kind of mind sharing like how your postpartum depression experience was, and then how, as a therapist, like you said, okay, I really need to implement these things in my life to move past this, for lack of better words?
Yeah, absolutely. I think postpartum depression, especially, and postpartum anxiety is so unique in that it can present in so many different ways. When we think of depression, we often think of someone who's sad or has trouble getting out of bed. But when it comes to postpartum depression and anxiety, it could be highly functional. You know, the person could be up, they can even be smiling, they're doing all the things, but they're holding the weight of the world inside of them. And that was very much my experience. On the outside, I looked completely fine, but I was having trouble bonding with my baby. I was having thoughts like, my life is over. I'm never going to feel like myself again. I was really struggling with the identity and mom guilt and just feeling like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. And I honestly, it took me a really long time to admit that it was postpartum depression. I took probably 6 months or so to actually reach out, start the process of finding a therapist myself. And then it honestly took me even a couple of years after that to say the words, I had postpartum depression. So I think it really speaks to just how much shame we can feel,
Yeah.
even as a mental health professional. Just, and it's totally not a failure, but we can still in the moment feel like there's something wrong with us that we're feeling this way when it's supposed to be the happiest time in our lives.
Yeah, I'm so sorry you experienced that. I experienced I guess, the other side of the postpartum anxiety part, right? Where you are like, you're a new mom, you're not really focusing on yourself, right? You're making sure the baby's healthy, and then you're kind of like the afterthought. And then it gets to a point where you see your friends and you're like, oh, that's like what I'm doing is maybe not really normal, or especially with the anxiety piece, right? Like, there were things that we're doing, like had the baby monitor when she was like 16 months old, like on the table at girls' night. And they're like, you can turn that off. I'm like, I can't. So little things like that, as just that postpartum anxiety and depression. And because I've been in these shoes and I've had these questions a lot, I'm really curious your thoughts on postpartum depression and or postpartum anxiety after a miscarriage. So maybe you're not bringing the baby home, but I don't know if you work with any clients. I know personally I felt like there was a huge hormone shift quickly, right? Because you're losing the baby, but you're not getting the pretty part of having the baby, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're still postpartum even after a loss. And of course, there's even more layers to that. There's definitely depression and anxiety after loss. And I don't think we really talk about that part of it enough.
Yeah.
But that's 100% definitely something that comes up. And there's just not enough, resources for and support for. And again, it might be something depending on how far along you were, people in your life may or may not know about, so there may or may not be support. And pregnancy loss is a type of disenfranchised grief, which is grief that isn't really formally recognized in our society. So often you won't have, specific paid time off
Right.
for that type of loss, and may or may not have rituals honoring your baby. So it's a very isolating, grief journey.
Well, I appreciate all of the topics we kind of ran through today. We have a couple questions just from listeners that have reached out asking, hey, like if we have a therapist on the show, like can we understand some of these questions? So I think the first part, and we've really already touched on the jealousy piece, but the question is like, is it normal to feel jealous of my sister-in-law? Is it normal to feel jealous of my best friend? And I guess I'll leave that question to you to kind of go over.
Yeah, I would say it's normal to feel whatever you're feeling, not to judge yourself for that feeling. Our emotions are so raw. And when we give ourselves space to feel them, it does have a way of kind of going in and out. Whereas when we judge ourselves, it has a way of just growing and growing and, getting bigger and festering. So 100%, I think it is normal to feel jealous. And I just encourage anyone to give themselves the space to feel that.
I love that. Okay, next question is, should somebody take a mental health break from treatment?
I think if you feel like that's important to you, 100%.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I love that. Okay, and the next one, I know I didn't prepare you for any of these, so you're doing a great job. But the next one is, how can partners support each other when, going through IVF or infertility or even depression and anxiety?
Yeah, I think check-ins are super important on both sides, checking in on how partners are feeling and doing with the process. Often partners experience journeys very differently. So
Yes.
not to get very traditional, because of course this is not the case for every couple. Often in heterosexual couples, a woman might feel more emotional, and the male partner might be in more of a let's just problem solve, problem solving, fix it mode, and might show their symptoms of grief or anxiety differently, which can kind of create a little bit of
Yeah.
you might feel
Like,
like the person's not feeling the same way, or
or doesn't
um,
care, doesn't get it.
yeah, it's almost like speaking different languages, even though at the core everyone's going through something really difficult, but it's manifesting differently. So I really encourage couples to talk about that and be open and honest and not assume, but instead ask questions, and then also share with each other what type of support you both need, because I really I appreciate the love languages
Yes.
approach in kind of figuring out what's my love language, what's my partner's love language. Okay, we have very different love languages. How can I speak to theirs? How can they speak to mine? And just having those open conversations about that.
Do you guys at Phoenix Health do any like couples therapy, or you typically are working one-on-one?
We work primarily with individuals, but we do see some couples, and
Yeah.
that's an area that I really want to grow our reach, because we get a lot of people reaching out about couples work throughout the perinatal journey, and it's such a highly specialized, perinatal and infertility is specialized in itself, and then adding couples work to that is even more specialized.
Oh, I
So we
bet.
really want to make sure that everyone has the proper training to be able to work with couples, but there's such a big need for it, because the couple goes through such a transformational journey, throughout these journeys.
Yeah, and I think it's so unique in this space because you typically are trying for kids, not always, but you're typically trying within those first few years of marriage, right? So it's like the first big grief, trauma challenge that perhaps this married couple is going through together. And then they're kind of like, wait, is it the marriage that's not working, or is it because like we have all of these other things going on? So very, very interesting perspective on that. Well, where can listeners find you? I know you have a really good social media presence for your company and then also for yourself too.
Yeah, so our website is www.joinphoenixhealth.com, and our Instagram handle is joinphoenixhealth, and then I'm also on Instagram as Dr. Emily Guarnotta.
Thank you so much, Emily. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.